They gave me 24 hours. 24 hours to cancel a pact they didn't create. 24 hours to break bonds they couldn't control. 24 hours to prove whether I lead a sovereign nation or a satellite state still orbiting the gravitational pull of Western power. They said it quietly, diplomatically. But the message roared. The pressure didn't come from one direction. It came like a storm, layered, relentless, rehearsed. Washington warned of security concerns. Paris mentioned regional instability. London asked for reconsideration. And then there was Tel Aviv, blunt, arrogant, surgical. An Israeli envoy, eyes sharp, voice flat, delivered it like an order dressed up as a favor. Your Excellency, you have 24 hours to cancel the Saudi-Pakistan Pact. The Prime Minister urges immediate disengagement for the sake of global security. Let me translate that for those who still live under the illusion of diplomacy. Back down, or we make you. They didn't say how. They didn't need to. We've seen this game before, over oil, over elections, over borders they drew without us. They expected fear. They expected me to call an emergency session. They expected my foreign minister to beg. They expected a retraction letter before the clock hit midnight. Instead, I stood still. I've faced bullets. I've walked through villages shattered by warlords and mercenaries trained in foreign capitals. You think a deadline scares me? No, gentlemen. I don't lose sleep over manufactured ultimatums. You should know by now Burkina Faso does not kneel. Not to your embassies. Not to your interests. Not to your timeline. The clock began ticking at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact moment because my aide rushed into the presidential palace with sweat on his forehead and trembling hands. Behind him came a parade of foreign diplomats, each carrying the same message wrapped in different flags. The German ambassador spoke of economic partnerships at risk. The Swiss representative mentioned banking relationships under review. The Canadian envoy whispered about development aid, reconsiderations. But it was the unspoken coordination that revealed the truth. 7 nations, 7 identical timeframes, 7 variations of the same threat. This wasn't diplomacy, it was a synchronized assault on sovereignty. I called my cabinet into emergency session not to surrender, but to witness history. Gentlemen, I told them, we are living through the moment our grandchildren will read about in textbooks. The moment Africa stopped asking permission to breathe. My finance minister shifted uncomfortably. Mr. President, the economic implications, I cut him off. The economic implications of slavery were profitable too. Should we have accepted those? The room fell silent. Because in that silence, they heard what I heard. The echo of every African leader who had been presented with the same false choice: comply or collapse. They called it destabilizing. They said the pact would provoke unnecessary tension. They said I was playing a dangerous game. But here's what they never said out loud, though every one of them meant it. How dare an African nation, a Muslim partner, and a nuclear-capable ally create something without our signature on it? Because that's what they fear, not the pact itself, but the precedent. The idea that we might start forging our own future, that we might start trusting each other more than we trust the colonizers who trained us to hate our neighbors. 24 hours. That's all they gave me. But what they didn't realize is this. You cannot place a countdown clock on dignity. They thought they were issuing a final warning. They were wrong. They were giving me my final confirmation that I made the right choice. Let me tell you about the pact they fear so much. It's not a declaration of war. It's not an arms race. It's not the formation of some rogue alliance bent on global destruction. It's 3 nations saying, we will defend each other. Saudi Arabia brings energy independence and financial resources. Pakistan brings technological capability and strategic depth. Burkina Faso brings mineral wealth and geographical positioning. Together we bring something they cannot tolerate: self-sufficiency. The pact includes joint military exercises, defensive exercises, shared intelligence on terrorist networks that threaten all our borders, economic cooperation that bypasses their banking systems, technology transfer that doesn't require their approval, cultural exchange that doesn't need their translation, and, most dangerous of all, a communication network that doesn't route through their servers. This terrifies them because for 70 years, they've controlled every conversation between the global south. Every trade deal had to be approved in Washington or London. Every defense agreement needed NATO's blessing. Every economic partnership required IMF supervision. We were never allowed to speak directly to each other, until now. The hours crawled by like a slow execution. 4 p.m. My phone rang 17 times. I answered none of the calls. 5 p.m. The French embassy requested an urgent audience. Denied. 6 p.m. A mysterious power outage hit 3 government buildings. How convenient. 7 p.m. My foreign minister received a call from someone claiming to be from the World Bank. They mentioned our outstanding loans and repayment schedules. 8 p.m. The Israeli envoy returned, this time with a thicker folder and a thinner smile. 9 p.m. Social media campaigns began trending, number Burkina Faso terrorism and number Africa needs protection. 10 p.m. My wife received a call at home. The voice was polite, calm, and spoke perfect French. Your husband is making a mistake that could affect your family's future. This is how they operate, not with tanks and bombs, those come later. First, they isolate you psychologically. They make you feel like you're making the decision alone. They fill your inner circle with doubt. They question your judgment through the people you trust most. They make surrender feel like wisdom and resistance feel like madness. But I've studied their playbook. I know how Lumumba was isolated before he was eliminated. I know how Sankara was surrounded by doubters before he was betrayed. I know how Gaddafi was painted as unstable before he was destroyed. The pattern is always the same. First they question your sanity, then they question your legitimacy, then they question your right to exist. So when my own advisors began suggesting compromise and negotiation, I knew the psychological warfare was working. Mr. President, my defense minister said carefully, perhaps we could delay the pact implementation by 6 months, give everyone time to adjust. I looked at him with the weight of history in my eyes. Minister, if we delay now, there will be no pact in 6 months. There may not be a government in 6 months, and there certainly won't be a sovereign Burkina Faso in 6 months. He nodded, but I could see the fear creeping in. Fear is contagious. Courage has to be more contagious. 11 p.m. arrived with a new wave of pressure. This time it came from within. Opposition leaders who had been silent for months suddenly found their voices. Student protests erupted in 3 cities simultaneously, all demanding dialogue and peaceful resolution. Religious leaders issued statements calling for wisdom and careful consideration. Business associations warned of economic catastrophe and international isolation. The media, suddenly unified, painted me as a reckless autocrat endangering the nation's future. All of this in 7 hours. 7 hours for a complete media campaign, organized protests, religious interventions, and business pressure. You think that happens by coincidence? You think civil society spontaneously erupts in perfectly coordinated opposition within hours of a diplomatic deadline? This is how modern coups begin, not with soldiers, but with manufactured consent. But I had prepared for this too. Because the one thing they underestimated about me is this. I had studied every African leader who had fallen to their schemes. I knew their methods better than they knew my weaknesses. At midnight, as my deadline approached, I did something they never expected. I called a live television address. Not to surrender, not to explain, not to justify, to educate my people about what was really happening. My fellow citizens, I began, tonight you are witnessing something that has happened across Africa for 70 years. A sovereign nation is being given an ultimatum by forces that claim to represent international law, but actually represent international control. I spoke for 37 minutes. I explained the pact clause by clause. I detailed every threat we had received. I named every diplomat who had delivered warnings. I read excerpts from their demands. I showed documents proving the coordination between embassies. I revealed the psychological warfare tactics being used against our government. And I asked one simple question: who gave them the authority to decide our future? The response was immediate and electric. Phone lines lit up with support. Social media exploded with solidarity hashtags. Spontaneous gatherings formed in city squares across the nation. Young people began sharing videos explaining the pact to their communities. Religious leaders who had called for caution hours earlier now called for courage. The manufactured opposition crumbled in real time as people saw through the manipulation. Because here's what they never understand about Africa. We recognize colonialism when we see it. We've lived it. We've survived it. We've fought it. And we know the difference between genuine concern and imperial control. My speech didn't just reach Burkina Faso. Within hours, it was being translated into Arabic, Urdu, Swahili, Portuguese, and dozen other languages. African diaspora communities shared it across continents. Pakistani students organized solidarity demonstrations. Saudi intellectuals published supportive articles. Indonesian activists drew parallels to their own struggles against Western interference. The global South was waking up to what was happening. This is what they feared most. Not our military pact, but our communication. Not our weapons, but our words. Not our alliance, but our awakening. Because they knew that once we started talking to each other directly, once we started sharing our stories without their translation, the lies would become obvious. Now I speak directly, not through envoys, not through communiques, not behind the polished curtains of diplomacy. I speak to you, Mr. Netanyahu. I received your message. I read every word, the pressure, the veiled threat, the assumption that my signature on the pact could be erased by your disapproval. You believed you were handing down a final warning. But let me tell you what it really was. A signal that your era of untouchable power is unraveling. You think fear is universal. You think power alone justifies your tone. You think you can shout, and the rest of us will fall silent. That may work in the echo chambers of the West. It may work in the marble offices of those who sold their principles for military contracts. But it does not work here. Not in Ouagadougou. Not with me, not anymore. Let me tell you what your 24-hour ultimatum really revealed. It revealed that you see African nations as extensions of your will, not as sovereign entities with their own interests. It revealed that you believe Muslim solidarity is inherently threatening to your security, rather than a natural response to shared oppression. It revealed that you consider any alliance that doesn't center your needs as an act of aggression against your existence. It revealed that your entire security framework is built on the assumption that everyone else must remain weak and divided. But most importantly, it revealed your desperation. Because confident powers don't issue ultimatums to small African nations. Secure nations don't threaten presidents over defensive pacts. Legitimate leaders don't demand other countries cancel agreements they're not party to. Your ultimatum wasn't a display of strength, it was a confession of weakness. You claim this pact is provocative. You say it's reckless, irresponsible, dangerous. Let me ask you something. Was it provocative when you dropped missiles on a refugee camp in Gaza? Was it reckless when your forces stormed Al-Aqsa in the middle of Ramadan? Was it dangerous when your spies operated in our capitals, monitoring our activists, blackmailing our ministers? Or is danger only defined when we take a step forward? Because what this really is fear. Your fear. You fear the world is beginning to wake up. You fear the illusion is fading, the illusion that you are the victim, always the victim, no matter what you do. You fear a future where African nations, Muslim nations, and the global South do not wait for your permission to defend themselves. And yes, you should be afraid, because that future is not theoretical. It is forming now. You say this pact will destabilize the region. No, Mr. Netanyahu, what destabilizes the region is apartheid. What destabilizes the region is 50 years of occupation, land theft, drone strikes, and lies passed off as policy. What destabilizes the region is the arrogance to believe that might makes right forever. This pact? It's not destabilizing anything, it's rebalancing. And if you feel unsteady now, it's only because you were standing on stolen ground to begin with. The 24 hours passed. I did not surrender. I did not compromise. I did not blink. At 3:47 p.m. the following day, exactly 24 hours after their ultimatum, I signed 3 additional defense agreements, one with Algeria, one with Iran, one with Venezuela. The message was clear. Your threats don't weaken us, they strengthen our resolve to find new partners. Your ultimatums don't isolate us, they help us discover who our real friends are. Your deadlines don't pressure us, they remind us that sovereignty has no expiration date. Within 48 hours of my defiance, something extraordinary happened. Mali announced a similar pact with 3 West African nations. Chad declared its intention to diversify its security partnerships. Niger began negotiations for defense cooperation with non-Western allies. Senegal quietly started exploring alternative development financing. The Central African Republic announced a review of all foreign military bases on its territory. This is the domino effect they truly feared. Not military escalation, but the spread of independence. Not regional war, but regional awakening. Not instability, but the end of their stable exploitation. Because once one African leader says no to their ultimatums and survives, others realize they can say no too. Once one Muslim nation defends another without Western approval, the myth of necessary mediation crumbles. Once one global South alliance proves successful, the monopoly on legitimate partnerships ends. Let me be clear. I am not your enemy, but I will not be your echo. I will not help you disguise injustice as diplomacy. I will not sit quietly while you commit violence and call it survival. And I will not cancel a defense pact because it threatens your monopoly on regional power. That monopoly is over. You built your security on silence, and I broke it. You built your influence on fear, and I am immune to it. You built your status on guilt, but I was not part of that history, and I will not carry that burden. So take your threats, take your deadlines, take your silence. Because from now on, when you look south, when you see Africa standing upright, unashamed, unbending, and unapologetic, remember this. We did not ask for your permission, we never will again. The weeks that followed my refusal taught me something profound about power. Real power isn't measured by the threats you can make, but by the threats you can survive. It isn't about the fear you can instill, but about the fear you can overcome. It isn't about the ultimatums you can issue, but about the ultimatums you can ignore. They tried everything after their deadline passed. Economic pressure. 3 development projects were mysteriously delayed. Diplomatic isolation. Suddenly, international conferences forgot to invite Burkina Faso. Media warfare. Western outlets ran stories about instability and authoritarian tendencies. Security threats. Intelligence reports warned of increased terrorist activity near our borders. Financial manipulation. Our currency faced unexpected market pressures. Each attack only proved the necessity of the pact. Each pressure tactic only demonstrated why we needed independent alliances. Each threat only confirmed that we had chosen the right path. But the most telling response came from the African people themselves. Students across the continent began studying the pact. Young leaders started questioning why their own governments couldn't make similar agreements. Activists demanded to know why sovereignty was treated as radicalism. Intellectuals published papers analyzing the psychology of ultimatums. Artists created songs celebrating resistance to imperial deadlines. The conversation had changed. From, should small nations challenge great powers, to, why shouldn't sovereign nations make their own decisions? From, is this pact dangerous, to, why is independence considered dangerous? From, will this cause problems, to, why are defensive alliances problematic only when we make them? This shift in questions was more dangerous to the old order than any military agreement, because questions lead to consciousness, consciousness leads to confidence, and confidence leads to the kind of collective action that empires cannot stop with ultimatums. Today, 6 months after that 24-hour deadline, the pact stands stronger than ever. Joint exercises have been completed successfully. Intelligence sharing has prevented 3 terrorist attacks. Economic cooperation has reduced our dependence on Western markets by 40%. Technology transfer has accelerated our development by years. Cultural exchange has strengthened bonds between our peoples. More importantly, the precedent has been set. African nations can make security decisions without European approval. Muslim countries can cooperate without American oversight. Global South alliances can exist without Northern mediation. Small nations can resist ultimatums from great powers and survive. Let me speak clearly, so there is no confusion, not in Tel Aviv, not in Washington, not in Paris, not in the Security Council, or the corporate newsrooms that mistake their echo chamber for the world. This pact is not an act of aggression. It is not a declaration of war. It is not some irrational provocation from unstable regimes, as your analysts so arrogantly describe it. No, this pact is a line in the sand, a line drawn with dignity, with clarity, with memory, a line that says, you will not cross us again without consequence. They ask, what does Burkina Faso have to do with Palestine? They ask, why would Saudi Arabia and Pakistan involve themselves in the affairs of a small West African nation? That's the question of someone who does not understand what solidarity means to the oppressed, because our struggles are connected. Our histories rhyme blood for land, silence for aid, exploitation wrapped in treaties. We were all told to wait, wait for development, wait for peace, wait for your systems to fix what you broke. We waited, and while we waited, our resources were stolen, our children were bombed, our heroes were assassinated, and our leaders were trained in your institutions to manage our decline politely. This pact means we are done waiting. It means the global South is no longer a marketplace for your weapons or a dumping ground for your morals. It means we have the right to defend ourselves with each other, not through you. It means we do not trust your security frameworks because we know who they were built to protect and it wasn't us. This pact is not about offense, it's about deterrence. It is not a sword, it is a shield. A shield against foreign drones, against IMF blackmail, against coups quietly blessed by embassies that smile in the morning and destabilize by night. It is about sovereignty, the kind that cannot be bought, cannot be borrowed, and cannot be negotiated at a round table where only one side writes the rules. You see, for decades we have been told that unity among Muslim nations, among African nations, among post-colonial nations is dangerous. Of course it is. Dangerous to who? To those who built their empires on our divisions. To those who thrived by making sure Burkina Faso never looked east, never looked south, never looked inward, only upward, toward the powers who kept their boots on our necks and called it international order. So yes, this pact is dangerous to you, because it threatens your monopoly on legitimacy, because it shows that our alignment is no longer horizontal and subservient, but vertical and sovereign. We are not trying to burn the world down, we are trying to stop you from burning it further, and that, to you, is rebellion. Let me say this once more, for the record. This pact does not mean war, but it means we are no longer afraid of one. It does not mean hostility, but it means we are done being hospitable to those who treat us like experiments. It does not mean escalation. It means equilibrium, and equilibrium is dangerous only to those who have ruled with imbalance for too long. So what does this pact mean? It means we remember who we are. It means we know who stood with us when we were alone. It means the age of isolation is over. And it means the next time the world asks us to choose between silence and survival, we will choose each other. When my reply was delivered firm, unapologetic, final, something strange happened. Silence, no press conference, no immediate sanctions, no emergency debate at the United Nations. Just silence. Not the silence of indifference. No, I know that silence too well. This was different. This was the silence of a system caught off guard. A silence not of calm, but of calculation. They did not expect my defiance. They expected me to stall, to explain, to clarify my position, their favorite phrase when they want a leader to undo himself without making a sound. But I didn't explain. I didn't stall. I didn't ask for more time. And so, they had nothing to respond to. No one speaks when their old tricks stop working, and in that quiet, I heard something louder than their warnings. Fear. Not panic, they don't panic. They strategize. They adjust. But this time, even that adjustment was slow, because I did something they weren't prepared for. I stayed the course. I didn't play the usual game, didn't offer a compromise, didn't pretend to be caught between two sides. I chose my side, the side of sovereignty, the side of dignity, the side of the global south rising, breathing, finally speaking back. And that shook them. The Israeli envoy left Ouagadougou 2 days earlier than planned. The French ambassador postponed her televised interview. The U.S. State Department released a statement so vague it could have been written by a ghostwriter for a weather report. That's when I knew something had shifted. Because when they don't condemn you outright but instead fall silent, that's not de-escalation, that's recognition. They realized the script was broken, that this African president, this young man from the Sahel, wasn't playing the part they assigned him. I've been called many things in the hours since: a destabilizing voice, a radical, a threat to Western African cooperation. Let them write their headlines. Because between their silence and their spin, the truth is louder than both. They are adjusting to a world where they no longer dictate everything, and that adjustment is painful for them. Because it's not just me, it's not just Burkina Faso. They feel the temperature rising from Bamako to Islamabad. They hear the murmurs in Lagos, in Algiers, in Caracas, in Jakarta. They see the shift subtle now, but soon unstoppable. A new world doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in moments like this, when silence from the empire confirms the fear they won't speak aloud. They will come back, of course, with new offers, new threats, new terms of partnership. But something in the air has changed for good. Because they now know we're not afraid of their silence. We're not afraid of being cut off from their systems. We're not afraid of being alone because we are not alone anymore. The silence they gave me was supposed to be punishment, but I received it as a sign that the message landed, a sign that the mask slipped, a sign that they know, even if they won't admit it, that their time as uncontested rulers of the narrative is over. You can only threaten a man who fears losing something. But what if the man has already chosen principle over position? What if the nation has already survived betrayal after betrayal? What if we've already walked through fire? Then silence becomes not a weapon but a confession. And that's exactly what it was. They gave me 24 hours. Now I give them forever. Because what we've set in motion cannot be timed, contained, or reversed. And this moment is bigger than one pact, one speech, or one standoff. This is a break in the timeline, a rift in the order that ruled us with threats dressed as diplomacy. It is the sound of a colonized world waking up and remembering its strength. And if that sounds dramatic, it's because we've been quiet for too long. Let the record show, I did not yield, not to pressure, not to fear, not to the old ghosts in Western suits who still think Africa is a chessboard and we are pawns to be moved, sacrificed, or bought. I did not kneel. I stood, and I stood because I remembered. I remembered the voices buried in silence, Patrice Lumumba, whose mouth was shut before his dream could speak, Thomas Sankara, whose body was buried, but whose vision refused to rot, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who dared to nationalize what was his, Muammar Gaddafi, who dreamed of a gold-backed African currency and paid the ultimate price for that dream. You called them dictators. We remember them as those who dared to disrupt your script. Now you add my name to your watch lists. You wait for me to stumble. You whisper of coups and accidents. You sow doubt in the minds of my own people. But I am not afraid. Because I did not begin this movement to protect myself. I began it to end the era where fear ruled us. You thought 24 hours would be enough. But 24 hours only proved how shallow your understanding of us is. We are not unstable. We are unshackled. There's a difference. We are not angry. We are awakened. There's a difference. We are not rebellious. We are resurrected. There's a difference. This pact is not just military cooperation. It is not just radar systems and defense grids. It is a signal fire, a message to every nation that has been told, wait your turn. To every movement crushed by NGOs and strategic partners. To every generation fed the lie that power is something you beg for, not build. We are not waiting anymore. I know what comes next. They will say I am dangerous. They will use terms like escalation, instability, extremism. They will convene emergency meetings not because they fear war, but because they fear irrelevance. A Burkina Faso that does not need their funding, a Saudi Arabia that speaks for itself, a Pakistan whose missiles don't answer to Washington, that is their nightmare. And I intend to make it real. To the people of Africa, let no one tell you your borders define you. We were carved apart, not born apart. To the Muslim world, your unity is not a fantasy, it is their fear. To the global South, you are not behind, you are not lesser. You are not late to the table, you were never invited. Build your own table. To the youth, you are not too young to change the world. They are just too old to imagine anything different. I did not give in. Because the pact is more than politics, it is proof. Proof that we can align across continents without the West acting as translator. Proof that we can stand together without asking who speaks first. Proof that power can come from dignity, not dependency. They hate that. Because this world they've built with their deals, their debts, their databases, it requires us to stay small, to stay grateful, to stay obedient. But we are done being well-behaved prisoners. I say this without theatrics, without ego, without apology. If standing by this pact costs me my life, so be it. If it brings sanctions, we will endure them. If it brings war, we will fight wisely. If it brings isolation, we will find each other in the darkness. Because I would rather die standing with the future than live kneeling before a fading empire. To those who threatened me, you've had your 24 hours. Now our clock begins. A clock counting down to something you cannot stop, only delay. The realignment has started. The silence is broken. And the next time you issue a warning, make sure you have the power to enforce it. Because I promise you this, we are not going back, we are not breaking ranks, and we are not canceling anything. So write your editorials, call your summits, draft your sanctions, issue your travel advisories. We are still here, and we are still moving forward. Let this be remembered, long after the news cycle forgets it, that when the world's most powerful tried to undo us in 24 hours, we gave them a truth that will echo for 100 years. You will never own us again. The story doesn't end with my refusal. It begins with it. Because what happened in those 24 hours in Burkina Faso will ripple across decades. Future historians will mark it as the moment when the global South stopped asking permission to exist, when Africa stopped apologizing for its sovereignty, when the colonized world finally answered back, and that answer will reshape everything.